What if I told you that what Ferrari's chief said about Hamilton could completely change how we understand F1's 2025 season? To what extent is SF25 really prepared for a champion like Lewis? In one of the most emblematic and challenging scenarios of world motor racing, the Monaco Grand Prix, the latent tension that has accompanied the incorporation of Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari was crystallized. This layout not only tests the millimeter ability of the pilots, but nakes the technical deficiencies of any car that is not perfectly balanced. Monte Carlo, with its sequence of closed curves, its slippery asphalt and the total absence of margin for error, becomes a magnifying glass on the slightest aerodynamic, traction or balance defect. And in this 2025 edition, that magnifying glass shone directly to SF25. Ferrari arrived at the Principality with the contained air, knowing that his car was still far from being fully understood. Not only was it a correlation issue between simulation and track data, but also a chemistry not yet specified between the machine and pilots. From the first laps in free training, Hamilton showed clear symptoms of discomfort. The car seemed to fight him instead of being his ally. Unlike his partner Charles Leclerc, who already has 2 years of experience with Maranello's development philosophy, Lewis is still in the process of deciphering each internal car code. From the sensitivity of the front axle in deep braking, to how the rear of the SF25 in the transition of acceleration in slow curve, a vital characteristic in a circuit like this. But the most striking were not just telemetric data or times per return. What truly shook Paddock was the frankness with which Frederic Vasseur addressed the situation. In a sport where each word is measured, calibrated and censored by the communication departments, that Ferrari's head publicly admits that Monaco will show some weak points of our car is not a simple technical statement. It is an internal alert, a discharge of responsibility towards engineering, and even a raw message to the pilots themselves. In this case, the clearest recipient was Hamilton. This makes even more strength if it is considered that days before, Vasseur had also recognized persistent problems on Saturdays in classification, a land where Lewis has built a good part of his legend. The fact that Ferrari has not yet been able to give the British a car that allows him to maximize his talent on a return is a brutal reminder that the change of equipment is not just a matter of colors. It is a complete technical rebirth, in which every millimeter of the steering wheel, each torque curve, every interpretation of the car's feedback must be relinked from scratch. Monaco's challenge then was not only the urban layout. It was the symbolic and tangible challenge of a champion in full transition, facing not only the circuit, but to the limitations of a car that still does not speak its language. A silent struggle between a pilot who has won everything and an environment that demands time, adaptation and perhaps a greater sacrifice than many imagined. The tension is in the air and it is barely the 4th calendar race. How deep will this learning curve for Lewis? And how much more can Ferrari tolerate before demanding results? For a team like Ferrari with a story full of glory but also of insatiable pressure, each technical decision is examined under a gigantic magnifying glass. And in Monaco, one of the few circuits where the ingenuity can match pure performance, the Scuderia decided to play an unusual letter. Bring back the rear wing of maximum aerodynamic load of the SF24, the car of the previous year. Apparently, this could be interpreted as a simple pragmatic strategy, a conservative play to maximize grip in a path where long lines shine by their absence and traction is everything. But, in reality, it was a public and resounding admission that the development of SF25 is still where it should be. The decision to resort to a piece of the past has deep implications. To begin with, it shows that Ferrari has not yet found an effective solution with the SF25 aerodynamic package that allows them to compete at the highest level in low-speed circuits. Round up a part they already knew, that they knew how it worked and how it responded, it was a way of looking for technical stability in a sea of uncertainties. However, at the same time, it is a sign of stagnation. It means that despite all the investment, simulations and work in the wind tunnel, Maranello's team still fails to create a new generation wing that equals the design performance of the previous year. For a team that aspires to the championship, this is a worrying symptom. The SF25, conceived as the natural evolution of SF24, should have been able to overcome its predecessor in all aspects. But in Monaco it was exposed, not only for the recoil in design but also for the implementation at the last minute of solutions that were not yet completely validated. A clear example was the new rear brake ducts, whose final incorporation came just this weekend. It is a crucial component, since it influences both the control of the temperature of the tires and the stability of the car in braking phase. Ferrari opted for this modification as an attempt to gain consistency in a track where the rear train control makes the difference between being fast or caught in traffic throughout the race. But the challenges did not end in aerodynamics or in thermal management. There was a very present psychological factor. For Hamilton, reuniting with from the past pieces in his new team, it was an awkward sign. Accustomed to a culture of constant innovation in Mercedes, seeing how Ferrari opts for solutions from previous seasons could be interpreted as a break in the evolution discourse that was promised to arrive. It is not just a technical problem, it is a clash of philosophies. Lewis is not just adapting to a new car, but also to a way of operating that sometimes prioritizes what is known about the risky. This re-engineering of the past also generated an internal contradiction in the team. While Vasseur talked about consolidation and reliability, engineers struggled to assemble a technical puzzle that allows them to compete without errors. The pressure for immediate results led Ferrari to make short-term decisions that can mortgage its future development. Because each resource that is invested in solutions of the past is a resource that is subtracted from the true goal, to make SF25 a winning car. In short, what was lived in Monaco was not just one more race. It was a radiography of the moment that Ferrari is going through. A trapped team between the need to show results and the lack of technical responses of his new machine. And in the midst of everything, a Hamilton that observes each movement, measuring if this sports marriage really has the potential to reach the altar of an 8th world title. When a pilot like Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, makes an error on the track, the impact transcends the sports. It becomes a media event, a symbol, even an excuse to start internal debates. This happened during the 3rd free training of the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix. In La Rascasse, a low-speed curve but very high technical demand, Hamilton lost control of the SF25 and ended against the wall. At first glance, the impact was lower, but the consequences within Ferrari were immediate, silent, and deep. The incident was the result of a sum of factors. On the one hand, an extremely nervous car on its rear train, which reacted unpredictably by applying power in the exit of closed curves. On the other, a pilot still in the process of adaptation, seeking to understand the limits of a car that does not forgive mistakes. And in the middle, the brutal pressure of a circuit where each millimeter counts. The combination was lethal. Lewis, in his attempt to find the optimal pace before the classification, went braking, lost the back of the car and, although he reacted quickly, could not avoid the impact. Beyond the physical damage to the car, which forced the mechanics to work counter-relage to repair the SF25 before the quali, the accident brought to light a latent tension in the internal environment of Ferrari. It was not only frustration for a ruined practice. It was the confirmation that the integration process between Hamilton and the team was not flowing as expected. From the engineers to Vasseur himself, doubts began to circulate. Is the British pilot really comfortable with our work philosophy? Is the team listening enough to your technical needs? Or is there a structural disconnection that threatens to transform into a fracture? In the qualifying session, that fracture became visible. Hamilton managed to get into the Q3, but was not able to extract the entire potential of the car. He finished 7th, behind his partner Charles Leclerc, which fueled uncomfortable comparisons. And although in the race he managed to overcome until 5th, the later analysis left a bitter taste. Because on a track where the exit position is almost everything, losing efficacy on Saturday means mortgaging any serious podium possibility. Even more when your partner, with an equally limited car, seems to be more synchronized with the technical demands of the layout. The subsequent statements of Vasseur were measures, but did not go unnoticed. When qualifying Hamilton's performance as competitive, but far from the potential, Ferrari's head showed that he expected more. Not in an accusatory way, but with the intention of marking a standard. A clear message wrapped in diplomacy. Ferrari cannot afford another year of adaptation. And Hamilton knows. This type of friction, although normal in the first months of a new association, are aggravated when they occur under constant pressure. Monaco's accident was not just a pilot error. It was a reminder of how thin the margin in Formula One modern. It was the spark that ignited an internal debate in Ferrari on what extent they must adjust to Hamilton, and to what extent they must expect it to be admonished to the environment. The real risk is not the rubbing on the track, but the silent distancing that can arise between pilot and equipment when there are no immediate results. What happens in the next races will define whether this incident was a minor stumbling or the first symptom of a deep fracture between Heptacampion and Scuderia. Because in Ferrari, more than in any other team, errors are not archived, they accumulate. And each adds pressure to the next. What is happening between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari in this seasonal start is not simply an adaptation story between a pilot and a car. It is the beginning of a narrative loaded with emotional, technical, and political tension. Because when a 7-time world champion makes a decision as monumental as changing the team after more than a decade, the entire world expects immediate results. But Formula One, as history has demonstrated it again and again, does not obey desires, but to physics, data, and internal dynamics that very few manage to see on the surface. This is not just a year of transition for Hamilton. It is a redefinition of its legacy. The image of a dominant, cold, calculator, and almost invincible pilot that he built with Mercedes is now replaced by the figure of a fighting competitor. A man who tries to rewrite the story, but this time in an environment that is not yet designed for him. How willing is Lewis to mold that environment? How receptive is Ferrari to change for a single man? And this is where your opinion becomes crucial. Because this is not a simple story of figures and final positions. It is a story in full development that is asking to be interpreted. Do you think Ferrari will be able to offer Hamilton a car at the height of his talent before it is too late? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a disappointment that will mark the twilight of one of the most illustrious races in the history of sport? Moreover, do you think Vasseur did the right thing by publicly exposing the weakness of the car just after its star suffered an accident? Was it a tactical maneuver to press engineers? A message to the press? Or simply a sign that in Maranello a certain impatience begins to emerge? I want to read you in the comments. What do you think of all this? Is Hamilton where it should be, or was it a mistake to leave Mercedes?